My name is Olivia Green, and I'm 27 years old. I've always felt like I was living a pretty ordinary life. Nothing too spectacular, but nothing too bad either. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, a city as vibrant and fast-paced as anyone could imagine. The kind of place where you hear the buzz of traffic in the morning and see the skyscrapers glistening in the afternoon sun. I worked as a project manager at a tech company, the kind of job where I could be on my feet all day, coordinating teams and making sure deadlines were met. On weekends, I liked to escape the noise of the city. I'd grab my hiking boots and head out to the local trails, breathing in the fresh air and finding peace in the simplicity of nature. There was something about being out there, alone with my thoughts, surrounded by the trees and sky, that helped me recharge for the week ahead. But when I wasn't working or hiking, I spent most of my evenings with my cat, Charlie. He was a constant presence in my life, curling up beside me while I watched TV or read. It was a simple, comfortable routine, one I never imagined would be shattered. Then came that fateful Tuesday afternoon. It started like any other day. I was in the middle of a presentation, talking to the team about the next big project, when suddenly everything changed. A malfunction in the office's electrical system caused a piece of heavy equipment to fall. The crash was deafening, and in an instant, everything went dark. I didn't know it then, but that ordinary Tuesday would be the day my life would take a turn I never saw coming. My day began like any other, just a regular Tuesday at the office. I was in the middle of presenting to the team, talking about our upcoming projects and deadlines. Everything was running smoothly, or at least that's what I thought. Then, without warning, everything went wrong. I was in the middle of explaining something when the lights flickered. I remember hearing a loud buzzing sound, and before I could even process what was happening, there was this massive crash. It felt like the ground shook beneath me. I turned just in time to see a large piece of equipment toppling over. The whole room seemed to freeze for a moment, and then the noise, the sharp, deafening sound of metal hitting the floor, filled my ears. In that instant, all I could feel was panic. My heart raced, and my body tensed, but before I could react, everything went dark. It was as if the world just disappeared. There was no sound, no light, no feeling, just emptiness. I couldn't understand what was happening. All I knew was that my world had just been turned upside down in a blink of an eye. And then, nothing. When I finally opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was how different everything felt. I wasn't in the office anymore. In fact, I wasn't even sure where I was. I looked around, and the world seemed to have transformed entirely. Instead of the familiar, bustling office space, I found myself standing on what appeared to be nothing. It was as though I was in the middle of an endless, wide-open expanse that stretched on in every direction. There were no walls, no ceiling, just infinite space. The ground beneath my feet didn't look like any ground I'd ever seen. It shimmered, almost as if it was made of silver glass. Every step I took felt like I was walking on something delicate, yet solid. It was beautiful in a way I couldn't quite explain. The whole place sparkled in the softest, warmest light, as though the very atmosphere was made of peace and comfort. I took a deep breath, and instead of the usual office air, stale and busy, I was met with an incredible sense of calm. The air was pure, fresh, and had a strange hum to it, almost like a peaceful melody that resonated deep within me. It wasn't music, not exactly, but something more profound. It felt like the kind of sound that could calm your mind and soul all at once. It was as if the space itself was alive, in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. At first, I wondered if I was dreaming, or maybe even hallucinating. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But even as my brain tried to process it, I couldn't help but feel this profound sense of peace wash over me. There was no fear, no confusion, just peace. It felt like every worry, every stress, every concern I'd ever carried in my life had evaporated in an instant. I stood there soaking it all in, wondering if I had somehow crossed over into another world. But instead of feeling out of place or terrified, I felt at home, safe, like I belonged there, in this strange, beautiful place. It was like the universe had hit pause on everything I knew and given me a moment of pure serenity. In that moment, I realized that I was no longer where I had been. I was somewhere else, somewhere beyond what I could have imagined. I stood there, still in awe of everything around me, trying to take it all in. The light, the peaceful hum in the air, the endless expanse beneath my feet. But then something shifted. As I was standing there, trying to process what was happening, I saw movement. A figure slowly emerged from the golden light that seemed to surround everything. At first, I couldn't quite make out the details, but as the figure came closer, I felt this incredible presence. It wasn't just the figure itself, it was everything about it. The way the light seemed to bend around them, the calmness that radiated from them like warmth from the sun. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I could feel the power in this being, but it wasn't the kind of power that made you feel small or scared. No, it was a power that made you feel seen, understood, and cared for. As the figure stepped closer, I felt my knees weaken, and I almost stumbled. Not because I was afraid, but because the sheer magnitude of their presence was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the kind of fear you feel when you're in danger. It was the kind of awe that makes you realize you're in the presence of something far beyond yourself. And then, as I looked into their eyes, it all clicked. This wasn't just a random encounter. I wasn't lost here or forgotten. I wasn't alone. I felt this deep, overwhelming understanding, like I had been expected, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. There was no confusion, no uncertainty, just an unmistakable knowing that I was in the presence of someone who had been waiting for me. As the figure drew nearer, I could feel my heart beating faster. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. But when the figure finally spoke, everything else seemed to fall away. "Olivia," the voice said. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight, like every word was made of something deep and eternal. "You've come." The way the words landed in my heart felt like a chord being struck deep within me. It wasn't just a greeting. It was a recognition, an acknowledgement that I was meant to be here, that this moment was not a mistake. I couldn't explain it, but somehow, deep down, I knew that this being, this figure, wasn't just someone I had stumbled upon. No, this was something far greater, something I had been unknowingly drawn toward. And as the words echoed in my mind, a wave of peace washed over me. It wasn't the kind of peace you get from a quiet moment or a calm day. It was the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even if you don't fully understand why. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I certainly didn't expect the answer that came next. "I am Jesus," the figure said, his voice calm and steady. The moment those words left his lips, something deep inside of me shifted. It was like all the questions I had ever asked about life, about purpose, about everything, suddenly became clear. But even though I understood on some level, the weight of what was happening still left me in awe. I couldn't fully wrap my head around it. I had heard the name Jesus all my life, but to hear it spoken by this being, standing before me in this place, was something beyond my comprehension. There was no fear, no confusion, just an overwhelming sense that I was standing in the presence of something or someone far beyond anything I could have imagined. The air around me seemed to hold its breath, as if the universe itself was waiting for me to process this moment. I couldn't find the right words. All I could do was stand there in complete silence, feeling the depth of what had just been revealed to me. As I stood there in the presence of Jesus, something began to settle deep within me. I could feel a quiet understanding rising up from the depths of my heart, like a truth I had known all along, but only now was realizing. The world around me, the shimmering expanse, the peaceful melody, the warmth of the light, wasn't a dream. It wasn't an illusion. I wasn't just in a different place. I was in a different state of being. I slowly started to grasp what was happening. It wasn't just the strange surroundings or the overwhelming presence of Jesus that made me feel this way. It was the knowledge that I was no longer alive. I wasn't sure how I knew it, but it became so clear in that moment. I had crossed over. My body, my life on earth. Those things were behind me now. I had died. I expected fear. I expected panic. I thought that this realization would bring dread or sorrow, but that's not what happened. Instead of fear, I felt peace, a kind of peace I had never known before. It was so deep, so encompassing, that it almost felt like I was being held in the arms of the universe itself. It was a peace that soothed every fear I had ever carried, every worry, every regret, and every insecurity. All of it melted away. I didn't have to ask the question, what now? Because in that peace, I knew everything was as it should be. I had crossed into a space where everything made sense. I wasn't just at peace with the moment. I was at peace with everything. The struggles of my life, the mistakes, the heartaches, all of it was now distant, like an old story that no longer had any hold on me. The weight of all those past burdens, which had once felt so heavy, simply didn't matter here. And then Jesus extended his hand to me. He didn't say anything, but the invitation was clear. There was no hesitation in my heart. Without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. The moment our hands touched, everything shifted. It was like the floodgates of emotion opened all at once. I felt a rush of love, like nothing I had ever experienced. Pure, unconditional love that wrapped itself around me like a blanket, holding me close, telling me that everything was going to be okay. It wasn't just love from him. It was love that came from everything around me, from the very core of existence. It was love that spoke without words, that reached into the deepest parts of my soul. Along with the love came acceptance. I realized in that moment that I was fully accepted, just as I was. There was no judgment here, no condemnation. In the presence of Jesus, I was not defined by my mistakes or my past. I was accepted completely, as if everything I had done, all the choices I had made, had been washed away in that flood of love. And then there was forgiveness. It wasn't something I had to ask for. It was simply given. I felt the weight of all my past mistakes, all the times I had hurt others, all the guilt I had carried for things I could never take back. It all lifted from me, as if it had never been there in the first place. Jesus' forgiveness didn't just cover my sins, it erased them completely and entirely. In that moment, I was free from fear, free from guilt, free from the burdens I had carried through life. I realized that this peace, this love, and this forgiveness were the true essence of the afterlife. There was no need to be afraid. There was only a promise of rest, of peace, and of a love that would never end. As I stood there beside Jesus, I couldn't help but feel both overwhelmed and deeply comforted by his presence. The warmth from the light around us, the peace that had settled into my heart. It was all so much to take in. But then he extended his hand once more, guiding me to walk with him. There was something about the way he moved, as though every step had purpose, as though we were not just walking, but moving through time itself. The moment we began walking, the landscape around us began to shift. It wasn't just the physical surroundings that changed. It felt like time itself was bending, like the very fabric of reality was being rewoven in front of my eyes. Suddenly, I was no longer standing in this ethereal, beautiful place. Instead, I found myself back in my own life, but not in the way I was used to seeing it. I saw myself as a child, laughing with my parents, playing with friends, experiencing simple joys. Those moments felt so pure, so untouched by the complexities of life. I saw myself reaching out to someone in need, offering kindness without hesitation, helping when I could, loving when I had the chance. It was a feeling of warmth, like the joy of being in the right place at the right time. But then the scenes began to change. I saw moments of my life that I had long forgotten, moments when I had failed to act with love. I saw the times when I had been too caught up in my own concerns to truly listen to others, when I had been quick to judge, or when I had let my own fears control me instead of acting out of kindness. The faces of people I had hurt or failed to see in their time of need flashed before my eyes. There was no judgment in those moments, just a quiet understanding that I had missed chances to show love, to act in a way that would have healed instead of hurt. As I saw all these moments, Jesus spoke softly beside me. "You've lived with good intentions, Olivia, but no life is without its challenges." His words were gentle, but they carried a weight of truth that resonated deep within me. I had always thought that if I could just try harder, if I could just do more, then I would be the person I had always wanted to be. But now, standing in this place, I saw that perfection wasn't the goal. It wasn't about getting everything right. It was about learning, growing, and choosing love, even when it wasn't easy. The realization was humbling. I had tried my best, but I had also made mistakes. And those mistakes weren't there to define me. They were there to teach me. They were part of my journey, part of the way I was learning to live and love more fully. As I continued walking beside Jesus, I felt a new understanding unfolding within me. It wasn't just the love I had shown that mattered. It was the love I had learned from my mistakes, the love that had grown deeper in my heart through those challenges. The beauty of the moments I had experienced, both joyful and painful, lay in how they had shaped me, how they had led me to this very point. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about growth, learning to love, and accepting that every part of the journey was important, even the parts that felt difficult. As I walked alongside Jesus, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease growing inside me. The journey we had begun felt so transformative, yet I still struggled with my own past. The memories of mistakes, times I had hurt others or let my fears dictate my actions, kept resurfacing. Every step I took was filled with doubt, and the weight of those regrets felt almost unbearable. I hesitated, feeling the heaviness of all that I had failed to do. "I've tried to be good," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "but I feel like I've failed so many times." Jesus stopped walking and turned to face me. His gaze was gentle, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes that made me feel as though I could trust him with the deepest parts of my heart. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought he might say something profound, something that would relieve the weight of my failures. And then, in his calm, soothing voice, he spoke the words that would change my perspective forever. "Failure is part of your journey, Olivia," he said, his voice resonating with understanding. "It is not what you failed at, but what you've learned along the way that truly matters." His words were like a soft breeze, gentle yet powerful enough to shift the air around me. I stood there, stunned. What did he mean by that? Failure had always felt like the ultimate defeat to me. It was something I wanted to hide, something I felt ashamed of. But now, hearing his words, I began to see a new light. Jesus continued, walking slowly beside me again as he spoke. You see, Olivia, every time you've fallen, you've learned something valuable. Each mistake, each struggle was an opportunity for growth. It wasn't the failure that defined you, but what you did with it afterward. I listened intently, trying to understand. It felt like a revelation, a truth I had never considered before. The idea that my failures were not the end, but rather a beginning of something deeper, something more meaningful. I had always feared failure, avoided it at all costs. But now I was starting to see that it was an integral part of my journey, an essential part of becoming who I was meant to be. Think about the times you've stumbled, Jesus said, looking at me with a warmth that made me feel safe. What have you learned from them? How have they shaped the person you are now? I thought about it for a moment. The times I had hurt others because I was too afraid to speak up. The moments when I had turned away from opportunities because I didn't believe I was capable. But as I reflected, I began to see a pattern. With every failure, I had learned something new. I had become more compassionate, more understanding. I had gained wisdom that only comes from falling and rising again. The key, Olivia, is not to run from your failures or be ashamed of them, he said, his voice filled with compassion. It is to embrace them, learn from them, and keep moving forward. Every step you take, every lesson you learn, brings you closer to who you are meant to be. I stood there, letting his words sink in, feeling a sense of relief that I had never known before. It was as if a burden had been lifted, and in its place was a new sense of clarity. Failure no longer felt like an enemy to avoid. It was simply a part of the journey, a stepping stone toward growth. As we continued walking, I realized that this was one of the greatest lessons I would carry with me, that failure was not something to fear, but something to embrace. It was through my mistakes that I had learned the most, and it was through my growth that I could truly begin to understand the depth of my purpose. As we walked through the shifting landscapes of my past, Jesus turned to me one final time, his gaze filled with love and understanding. You've learned much today, Olivia, he said softly, but there is one final truth I want you to carry with you. I looked up at him, eager to absorb every word, knowing that whatever he said next would be life-changing. He smiled gently and continued. The journey doesn't end here. The lessons you've learned, the growth you've experienced, they will continue with you. But remember, Olivia, you are never alone. Your purpose, your calling, it is all a part of something greater than yourself. Your faith, your love, your willingness to embrace both the good and the difficult moments. These are the things that will guide you. I felt a warmth flood through me, a deep knowing that no matter what came next in my life, I would always carry the peace and the strength that I had discovered here in this moment. Jesus had shown me the power of embracing my failures, learning from them, and finding strength through them. He had shown me that love and forgiveness, both for myself and for others, were the true path forward. As the surroundings began to fade, the light grew brighter, and I felt myself gently being drawn back toward the familiar world I had known, the world I had left behind. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't uncertain. I knew now that my life had a purpose far beyond what I had ever imagined, and that purpose was rooted in love, grace, and understanding. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the hospital room, the familiar faces of the doctors and nurses surrounding me. But I no longer felt the panic or the fear that had once gripped me. I felt at peace. I felt whole. In that moment, I understood. Death had not been an end, but a beginning, and I was ready to face the future with a renewed heart, full of faith, knowing that no matter what, I was never alone. The lessons I had learned from my encounter with Jesus would stay with me forever, guiding my every step. I smiled, closing my eyes for a brief moment, grateful for the second chance I had been given. And with that, I knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I would embrace every moment with love, faith, and the understanding that even in our failures, we find the path to who we are truly meant to be.